Hey, welcome back everybody. Today I am going to walk you through the assembly process of our 440 big block Mopar engine. I did a 440 build, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 years ago, but I don't know, 6 months ago or so I was going back through some of my videos and I kind of watched I watched the 440 build that I did, and man, that was pre-tripod days. And I'm looking at the quality of the video, and I'm looking at the shakiness of the camera, and I'm just thinking, man, this is a terrible video. Why would anybody watch this? So, fast forward to today, better camera, tripod, get a little more detail. So this is our 440 big block Chrysler engine, aka the Orange Monster. After the vatting process, that's actually some of the original factory paint that was left on there, but it's pretty clean. We disassembled the engine, put it through the vatting process, magnafluxed it, checked it for cracks. Now we also bored the cylinders 30 thousandths oversized, and I'm going to walk you through some of the parts. Now this is a little bit of a different situation. It's going to be a pretty basic build. The guy that owns this car has owned it since it was new, and it is a Charger. And it's not one of the 68, 69 Chargers. I believe it's like a 73, 74. So it's a little different body style Charger, but he bought it brand new. And you know, I talked to him about the build, and he's like, look, the engine's got a lot of miles on it. It's kind of tired. We're not going to do any crazy upgrades to this engine. He wants to keep the car all original. He doesn't want a crazy cam. He doesn't want a crazy compression ratio. He's not going to race it. It's a car that it was his daily driver for many years, and now it's just kind of a family heirloom type thing. And so we're not going to do any crazy high performance build on this thing. We're basically going to do a replica of the stock rebuild. But it does come with it has a factory forged crank in it. It doesn't have the best flowing factory heads. It's got the heads when you got into 73, 74 on these big blocks were they kind of were smogger heads, but the Chryslers, I mean, they were okay for a stock build. They did fine. So I'm going to walk you through just what you would do if you just wanted to do a basic plain Jane budget build on a 440. And keep in mind, at the end of the day, you still have 440 cubic inches. Plus the 30 over that we bored it. So, by today's standards, certainly not a real efficient engine. Certainly not something that you're going to be racing and is going to be able to really compete with the high horsepower stuff. But it's just a cool old build. I love these Chryslers. I'm a big block Chrysler guy at heart. I love these engines. The architecture on these blocks is great. They're really stout. It's a skirted block, much like the 390 FE engine. So it's a very stout, very strong engine design. Even in stock form, they're incredibly strong, and they hold up, phenomenally well. And they make, pretty decent power. We're thinking we're probably going to get 375 horsepower out of this, which I know, and I realize that's nothing to write home about, but that's what the customer wants. And you may be on a budget too. If you want to build a 440, you want to build a really good, stout, strong big block, you don't really have to go all out crazy high performance, zinging the thing up to RPMs and paying thousands of dollars for all of your parts. You can do this on a budget and have a pretty decent, good running motor that's actually pretty cool and sounds cool and is fun to drive and all that stuff. And that's really what it's all about as far as I'm concerned. And so, yeah, let me walk you through these parts and then we'll get going on this block. The block has been vatted, like I said, and bored and prepped. We've done all of the checks and the measuring on the main bore and so forth, and everything is in really good shape on this block, so it's going to be a great builder. So let me walk you through these parts and then we'll start talking about what we're going to do with this thing. Alright guys, so this is your basic rebuild kit. What it comes with is, of course, we got our cam bearings, we got an oil pump, which is just a standard flow stock pump. It comes with a set of new core plugs and gallery plugs right there. We got a new timing chain and gear set. And again, just a stock replacement set, nothing performance, but decent. Then of course we have we wanted to go with decent bearings, so we got the Clevite rod bearings and Clevite main bearings. A camshaft, which is again stock replacement because that's what the customer requested. He said, I want it 100% original stock. And one of the reasons that he wants to do that is later on, if he ever goes to sell the car, he wants it to be all original. He doesn't want anything modified on the inside of this engine to the point where somebody would say, well, you know, it's really not original, and he's afraid that's going to hurt the value. I don't know that it would to upgrade the cam, but that's his thing, so that's what we're doing. And then of course the lifters that come with the camshaft, and then the gaskets out. Now on the gaskets, I would highly recommend that you go Felpro. Don't go with cheapy gaskets. Felpro is, in my opinion, the best out there. They're really good gaskets. Had very good luck with them. Now we have the pistons and connecting rods. Now we did do some work to these connecting rods, and I would recommend this. These are press fit connecting rods. Here's the original rods that he had in his engine, and they were in good shape, but this is one area where we spent a little money. I told him you need to spend some money. What we did is, first of all, we checked the rods, we magnafluxed them, make sure none of them were cracked. They were all in good shape, none of them were twisted or bent or anything. And then we replaced the rod bolts with ARP bolts, and we also resized or rebored the big end bore. We honed it, we did the resizing, you cut the cap and you rehone it and make, because these have a tendency to get out of round, and they were a little bit out of round. So we resized, reworked the rod, made sure that the size was perfect here. And then we went with new cast pistons, but we did upgrade the pistons to a hyper-eutectic piston. It's a flat top hyper-eutectic piston, which the hyper-eutectic piston is a pretty good upgrade from the stock pistons, and it really doesn't detract from the originality of the car. You're not going to, nobody's going to say, oh my gosh, it's got hyper-eutectic pistons, that's not original, you know. They're not even really going to know unless they actually know what you put in there. But the hyper-eutectic piston is a pretty good upgrade from the stock, and it is a flat top. The factory piston that was in here, I've got the old one sitting over there, they were also flat top, so this is original configuration. The compression height is the same. We did go with also a premium Molly ring on here, the Molly top ring from Hastings. So that's really, and my advice is don't compromise with the connecting rods. Make sure that you have a machine shop check out the connecting rods really well. They need to be checked for cracks, magnafluxed. You really need to replace these bolts. These are some of the most important fasteners in the whole engine. They're highly stressed. And man, when you got, I believe this engine has, it's about 140K on it, which is not crazy. Probably pretty low mileage for something from 74. But you know, the guy's original owner didn't drive it that much, at least not in the last 10, 15 years. So, but we wanted to make sure that we weren't going to have any problems on the lower end here. So we don't want to skimp when it comes to connecting rod bolts and stuff like that. The reason that he's rebuilding it is he did, I guess one of his relatives or something borrowed the car, and he did, it got overheated, and he said, man, it still ran for like a year or two after that, but it just wasn't the same. You know, had a he thinks he had some kind of a head gasket seeping or something, and I've got the heads over in the other, the cylinder head shop. We'll go through those later in the video. I didn't really see anything crazy wrong with them, but you know, just normal wear. So once we get to that point, I'll walk you through the rebuild of the heads. But that's really it. I mean, so all of these parts that he bought here that I mentioned, the cam, the lifters, the bearings, the timing chain, the oil pump, the gas cassette, the pistons, rings, including the resizing of the rods, the ARP bolts, which are about $100. Those are pricey. He's got about $1,000 into this, which is pretty decent. I mean, just for parts and the labor on the rods. Now, that doesn't include the crankshaft. Now, the one thing we did find is the crankshaft had quite a bit of wear on it. So when we recut or reground the crankshaft undersize, we had to go 20 thousandths under on the rods and mains. And now, it was an original standard crank. It had never been out of the car before. The engine never been out. But it did have quite a bit of crank wear, and it appeared as if, and this is just my speculation of what I saw, it appeared as if the car really didn't get oil changes like it should. It looked like there was a lot of damage and wear in there from dirt. Now, it could have been dirt coming in the intake, I don't know, but usually what that is it's just the oil changes aren't done as often as they should in the car. The engine gets abused a little bit, and when the oil gets dirty, dirt is actually an engine's #1 enemy. That's why you got to change your oil religiously. So when the oil gets contaminated and dirty, it has a tendency to kind of tear up the crank. So we did have, we had one rod journal that was down about 13 thousandths. So we couldn't go 10 under with it. And then we had some mains that had some wear too. The bearings were kind of torn up a little bit, not extremely bad, but you know, it wasn't anything crazy. It wasn't anything catastrophic. It was just wear and tear on an engine that looked like it had been, you know, neglected a little bit. But we definitely were able to go 20 under on the crank, and it turned out nice. And it is a forged steel crank, and so, you know, no issues with that. The one thing that is notable, and one of the ways that you can identify a forged crank, is it has a big fat parting line here. This is a big fat line, and you can see we got 2 marks there because we went 20 under on the rods, and we also went 20 under on the mains. So it is a factory forged crank, and these things are really stout. The next step here is going to be to install the cam bearings. I'm not going to really spend a lot of time explaining cam bearings in this video. I have a bunch of other videos where I'm installing cam bearings, but basically the gist of this is the cam bearings have a specific location in the engine. So you see here, we have position #1, and you look at the number on the bearing, and the number on the bearing has to coincide with the position, because it's not that the inside of the bearing is necessarily a different size, it's the outside based on that housing bore. So each bearing has a specific location that it has to go into. My recommendation is, and also the other thing is, the oil hole, very imperative, has to be lined up with the oil gallery hole in the block. If you get that oil hole off, no oil is going to get to your cam and you're going to be in trouble. And this also requires a special pressing tool, and you've seen it in some other videos. My recommendation is that you have a machine shop put the bearings in. That's usually part of the block prep. I do it myself because I do all the machine work, but unless you want to go out and spend $500, because that's how much the cam bearing tool is, it makes no sense to spend $500 on an installation tool if you're just doing one engine, right? You're gonna have to do quite a few cam bearing installs to pay for that tool. You know, probably several hundred. So don't go buy the tool and try to put the bearings in yourself. Plus, there's a fair amount of skill that's involved in putting these bearings in right without damaging them, even with the tool. So have the machine shop do that. things that's interesting, you might look at this connecting rod and think, man, that thing's got a lot of rust on it. Actually, that's not rust. What this is, what they used to do at the factory, if they had a connecting rod bore that was too big or they machined it and it was like oversized a little bit, what they would do is they would coat the connecting rod with brass, with bronze. They would immerse it in bronze. And if you look at this where we resized it, it's crazy, but it's got this gold tint to it, and even when we resized it, you can see that there is brass or bronze embedded into the rod. And the reason they did that is because this connecting rod was obviously machined a little too big at the factory, and they tightened it up. I thought that was interesting. Once in a while you'll see it. You'll take an engine apart and one of the connecting rods is gold colored, and it's like, oh my gosh, that's what the factory used to do. So this one actually had a factory rod in it that they had put through the bronze coating process. One other thing on the cam that I didn't mention earlier, I wanted to tell you, I told you that this is a stock cam, and this is an Engine Pro cam, and it's a stock profile, and actually we're cheating a little bit because the profile on these is actually a little better than stock. It's the old cam technology from the 70s, wasn't the greatest. So yes, they have basically the same lift and duration, but they designed the cam because we've learned a lot about cam profiles and technology in the years since, that they actually designed the lobes so they're much more efficient than the earlier grinds, and so it actually works a little bit better, it gets a little better mileage. And the other thing, man, one of the things they did is they for emissions in the 70s, in the mid 70s especially, 73, 4, 5 and on up, and in 76, 77 the big blocks pretty much all died out in the cars. But anyway, they would retard the cam timing. They would build cam timing retard into the gears. And so, but the timing set that we've got, they would do on the old cams is they would locate the gear, the mark on the gear, they would retard it. So when you set it up, it would actually retard the cam timing or make it late, which supposedly helped for emissions. I really don't think it did help, actually. I think it just made the motor run like dog poop. Can I say dog poop? Oh, okay. I'm looking at my video guys to make sure I can say dog poop. Okay, so they've corrected that with this set. So we're going to set the timing. It's going to be advanced to where it was from the factory, and the camshaft is going to work a little better just because of things they've learned about cam manufacturing over the years. They make them more efficient. So it actually is going to be a little better than it was, even though technically it's stock configuration. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, let's get these cam bearings in. So one thing that's notable here on the cam bearings, guys, if you ever put these in, or if you're ever looking at your block, the number 4 cam bearing in the block is what feeds the lifter gallery. And so what you're going to notice is on the number 4 bearing, it's got an oil feed hole on top. Also down here, it has 2 other holes. It has a hole there, and it has a hole there. So if you look in the cam bearing bore on the block, you're going to have an oil hole up top that this lines up with, and then in the bore itself, going down here to each set of lifter bores, one on either side. So this sits in the block like this, and these oil holes are feeding the oil galleries that feed the lifters. So you got to make sure the number 4 bearing, it's going to be different. If you look at all the other bearings, they've only got 1 hole in them. See, there's a hole there. There's no other holes in that bearing, but the number 4 is unique, and it's going to have 3 oil galleries that you have to line the bearing up. And this is something that the machine shop will do, but just keep that in mind. There's one bearing, which is number 4 in the block, that is unique. So this is what we're talking about here, guys. If you look at this bearing, the number 4 bearing, now I've got an oil gallery coming from the crankshaft here. You can see I got my flashlight, and if you look down there at the bearing, you can see I've got light coming through that hole, because the top hole in the bearing is lined up with this oil passage here that's fed from the crank. But then if you look down on the upper side of the block here, we don't want strobe, we got 2 more holes there, and they are actually lined up with the oil galleries, the 2 oil galleries in the block. If you look at these other bearings, they don't have those holes there. So that's the one unique bearing. It's got 3 oil feed holes in it, so we want to make sure we get that right. But that's how it goes in there, just like that. Perfect. Okay, all the cam bearings are in, all the oil holes are lined up. We're rocking and rolling. So we got all our cam bearings installed, all the oil holes are lined up, everything looks good. Now the very next step is what we want to do is we want to make sure the cam fits in there okay, because you know, sometimes the blocks, especially on these Y blocks, or not really a Y block, a skirted block configuration, what can happen is there's some distortion on the cam bores, and when you put the cam bearings in, the cam doesn't want to fit, and you actually got to massage these bearings very lightly with some very fine sandpaper or a Brillo pad, and you just got to work them to get it in. But we're hoping that the cam's just going to go in this thing without any of that, because that's a lot of extra work. Take a little dab of clean oil and put it on each one of these journals. We don't ever want to put this thing in here dry, even to test fit it. We haven't final washed the block yet, but you want to just take a little dab of oil, and then when you go in with this, you got to be real careful. You might want to get, CompCam sells a cam handle that goes up here that you can put on, or you can get a long bolt or something. I've been doing it long enough, I don't need to do that. But again, even at that, I still have to be very cautious not to damage any of these bearings. This cam feels like it's going in really nice. And also I've got the back plug out of the motor here, plus the crank's not in it, obviously. And when we do our final assembly, you'll see that I always put the cam in first. The reason I put the cam in first is because I don't want that crankshaft in the way, and then I got a blind hole here. I want all this open, so I can gently put this cam in, and I can reach in here and I can help get it in. It's a big help when getting this cam in safely without damaging bearings. You want to watch that distributor gear that you don't nick that bearing up there. So we're going to be really careful. I'm going to reach in the back here because they don't have the back plug in, and then we're just going to very gently tap that cam in. Now you'll notice I'm not using a steel sledgehammer. I'm just barely tapping it in, mainly because it's hard to kind of finagle that in. Now the moment of truth. Will it rotate? Let's put a socket on here and see if we can gently rotate this. Oh yeah. Turns nice. Okay, so the cam in this case is turned really nice. Doesn't have too much resistance. Sometimes you'll feel a hard spot. This doesn't have a hard spot at all. It's turning really nice. No binding, nothing like that. So that's a good rotating cam. So you got about a 50-50 shot on these skirted blocks, whether or not those cam bearings are kind of tweaked a little bit. Sometimes they are. And you just go in with a very soft, like Brillo pad. Might have one here somewhere I can show you. Oh, here we go. You just take a little Brillo pad on those bearings and you just kind of you know, clean them up a little bit where the shiny spots are where it's binding. But in this case, we didn't have any of that. Now, like I said, the machine shop that puts the cam bearings in is probably going to do that for you. Okay, so we got our cam bearings in, our cam fits nice. Now that we got the bearings in, we can put this thing up on the stand and actually do our final wash with soap and water, and then we can put this baby together. Okay guys, so what I've done is I got the engine up on the stand, I final washed it with soap and water, and we painted it. We masked it off and painted it. I don't really think you needed to see that on camera. I mean, if you want to talk to me about how to paint an engine, mask stuff off and paint it, or final wash it, I actually have other videos where I'm actually final washing. Send me a message and we'll talk about it, but it's pretty straightforward stuff. So now that we've got the engine cleaned up and prepped with paint, and then of course we final wash it with soap and water, and then we'll wipe out the cylinders really good before we put the pistons in. The next step, I want to talk to you about the oil galleries, because there's a bunch of oil gallery plug holes that have to be blocked off, and these plug holes, most machine shops are going to pull all those plugs out. Now the new plug set comes with the oil galleries that you're going to need to put in the block. So the first thing we have is we have a couple of them in front here, and then we got a couple in back, and I'll show you how we deal with these. So on the front of the engine, we got the block upside down now. You've got an oil gallery plug that goes up in this way, and then you've got another one here, and these are threaded plugs. Those threaded plugs are going to come in the set. Now some guys will take and they will put sealer or Loctite on these plugs. If the plugs go to the exterior of the block, then I would agree that you need to do that. But these plugs here that are underneath the timing chain cover, you don't need to seal these plugs. If these plugs seep a tiny bit of oil, it is not going to make any difference, because if they seep anything, which they probably won't seep much at all, any of the thing that seeps past this is just going to go right back down into the oil pan. It's not going to leak externally. Now when we do the external bolts on the back of the block, you will see that we need to seal those plugs, and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, you want to get these good and tight. Okay, there's that one. And then we're going to go in with this one here. You want to make sure you put these plugs in before you assemble the engine, because if you forget to put these in, your engine's not going to have the proper oil pressure. You're going to have a big problem when you go to fire this thing up. So we have to have all of the oil galleries have to have fresh plugs put in them. Like I say, most machine shops are going to remove all these plugs to properly clean the block. In fact, if they don't remove them, the block won't be cleaned properly. So there's your two plugs in the front. Get them in good and tight, and you're good to go. Now we're going to go back around to the back of the block. Okay guys, so we've come back here to the back of the block now. There are two oil galleries here, and what I like to do is I recommend you use blue Loctite or some kind of thread locker on these threads. Now these are tapered pipe plugs and they seal pretty good, but they can seep a little bit of oil, and we don't really want a drop. We don't want this thing to leak a drop of oil out of it. So I just you don't need to get a crazy amount on here. We just go all the way around once with a thin layer of this blue Loctite. And these plugs are not going to leak. So we want to put these in, and then once we get them in there, we want to snug them up pretty good. And this always works really well. You don't really seem to have too much trouble with these sealing. I've never had one leak using this method. So, and then of course we want these to be tight. You want to get them in there good and snug so that they don't leak. And once they're snugged up, just leave the excess Loctite on there. Just leave it there. Okay, it's not going to hurt anything. Same thing on the other side. And that will ensure that you're going to have a real good seal back here. And again, make sure you get these oil gallery plugs in. This is something you don't want to forget. Many years ago, back when I knew everything, I built a small block Chevy for a guy, and I left the front gallery plugs out of it under the timing chain. And needless to say, it was disastrous. So I had to do the engine twice. So you don't want to forget these. This is not a step that you can just bypass. So plugs, very, very important. The next step is we also have this rear cam plug that we want to put in too. Sometimes we're going to wait on that because if you see this bore is kind of interfering with the stand here and I can't really get a driver on it. So we're going to wait until we get this off the stand to do that. It's okay, you don't have to put that in right away. You can wait till you take it off the stand so you have access for your driver. The other thing is the core plugs. The core plugs that go on the block, some people call them freeze plugs. That's actually not what they are. So we're going to rotate the engine over. Now on these plugs, I recommend you do the same thing with the Loctite. We want to take, and you want a socket that fits just inside. If you look at this, that socket fits just inside that lip, just like that. You want a little bit of space, but we've got a socket that fits right inside so we can drive that in. You want to take just a thin layer of this Loctite and you want to put it just a thin layer around the edges, because these core plugs will seep coolant if you don't seal them. The manufacturers all seal them. They require that they recommend rather that you seal them. So we're just going to put just a thin bead of Loctite like that on there. And then you take your makeshift driver, your impact socket, and you want to drive this straight in so it's flush. You don't want to go any deeper than flush. Maybe just below the surface. And that's good. And if a little Loctite seeps off, just leave it on there, right? You can wipe that off later. And then of course you want to repeat that with all the plugs. We want to get all those in. There's also a little, sometimes we have a water jacket plug. This is a plug here. It's just a little 1/4 inch pipe plug that goes in here, and we need to put that in too because that goes directly into the cooling system. And again, we're going to want to use Loctite on that. So same thing with these little 1/4 inch pipe plugs. If they're on the exterior portion of the block, we need to seal them. And that's going to go right in that hole. Just like so. Alright guys, so we've got all of the plugs in, we got them all sealed up. Now the next step, like I talked about earlier, what we want to do is we want to put this cam in. You notice I don't have the crank or anything in here, and the reality is I don't even have the right bearings for this motor, so the crank installation is going to be on another day, although in the video you won't know that. It'll seem like it was done 5 minutes later. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and install the camshaft in this engine. And of course we fit it earlier and it worked good, so we always want to put the cam in first. Now here's the thing, if you have a flat tappet cam, which we do in here, I recommend that you use a really good assembly lube, like Moly Graphite or something, and be generous with it on these lobes. Flat tappet cabs have a lot of pressure on them during break-in. We don't want any metal to metal contact here. We want to make sure that we get these lobes good and lubed with a big generous amount of some kind of assembly lube, high pressure lube like graphite or something like that. This stuff I buy at Napa. It's called Moly Graphite. It's pretty good. So coat the cam real good. Now on the main journals of the cam, which is what rides in the block, we just want to put a little bit of oil on these. You don't want to put a big thick assembly lube on that. Only on the lobes. The rest of it we're going to put oil on. We have generously coated our cam with assembly lube, and also on the gear up here we've put a very generous amount of assembly lube, moly graphite assembly grease on that lube. We don't want any of this stuff to be dry. And then we're just going to gently install our cam in the engine like we did earlier when we test fit it, being very careful. You want to make sure you don't force this in or nick the bearings or anything. We're just going to very gently go in there. And then the nice thing about having this open here is it really helps me to get this in. I can grab the cam on the back side, then I can come in through the hole in the back where there is no plug at this point, and just kind of gently work this cam into place, and voila, your cam is installed. We want to rotate this a few times. Oh, that's beautiful. Turns nice and free, no problems. Got it lubed up. And yeah, cam installation. Now we can start looking at the crankshaft bearings and so forth. Unfortunately, I have the wrong bearings. When I ordered the kit, I thought I had a 10 under crank, and it's not 10 under, so I've got to get the bearings. So I'm going to walk away from this engine. What I recommend, anytime you walk away from this when you're building it, you need to take a nice clean bag of plastic or something. Plastic bags work great. And make sure that you seal up this motor, because any dust or dirt or grease or anything like that that gets in here is going to have problems. So we don't, now that we're final wash, anytime you start the assembly process and you walk away, make sure you bag it up. Alright, so now we're going to go over to the other shop and we're going to take a look at the heads and see what we got, because I'm at a standstill on this. We will get back to this very soon. Actually, in the video it's probably going to be pretty quick. You won't know the difference. So let's head over there and we'll take a look at the heads.